That was such a great episode. Why didn't more people listen? Sometimes I feel like, is this thing even on? Hi, my name is Neil Matthews. I too have been exactly what I just described. Wondering and wanting a second set of ears to hear my show. Well, that's when I came up with Podcast Insight Solutions, providing you insight and solutions into your show. Whether that be improving your interview style, improving your questions, getting the guests to really come alive, or maybe it's the audio. That's always a little shaky, or maybe it's the editing. I could get better at that. Well, that's where Podcast Insight Solutions comes in. I'd like to listen to your show, provide a second set of ears, and help you come up with solutions to those problem areas in your show. Right now, we're offering a free 30-minute consultation to take your show from meh to shining like a diamond. At Podcast Insight Solutions, we're transforming podcasts with expert insight. Book your consultation today.
Welcome home to Other People's Shoes, where every step tells a story. Get ready for an emotional journey like no other with Homecoming. Our homes are more than just a place. It's where we find safety, comfort, and connection through intimate conversations, heartfelt anecdotes, and inspiring stories. We believe that everyone deserves to feel welcomed and secure in their own home. Let us remind you of the beauty and warmth that home should bring. Other People's Shoes, where every step leads you to Homecoming.
Welcome home to Other People's Shoes. As you know, I'm your host, Neil Matthews. Super excited that you've come home today. Now, I got to be honest with you. A couple of years ago now, my friends at Nike, my friends at Jumpman, they had this amazing commercial. Stick with me for a second. It is this, you'll have to go with me. It's this sheriff. He's in a patrol car and he's looking at this car that's been stopped. At the bottom of the caption, it says Champaign, Illinois. And so lo and behold, the guy comes up and, you see him go back to the car and he's writing a ticket. It's clear. He hands the person the ticket and he comes back in. There's a camera guy there. You don't see him. He's off camera. And this voice says, wow, he was only going 2 over the speed limit. Why'd you give him a ticket? And he goes, not in Champaign, Illinois. And it flashes to 2005, Carolina beating the Fighting Illini. And then you see the car pan out and it pull away and there's a North Carolina logo in the back, the NC. Just makes me laugh. Every time I think of Champaign, I think of that. Well, now we're going to have to rework that because now we're going to have to add my good friend Jennifer into that. Jennifer, how are you today?
I am well, Neil. Thanks for having me. Glad to be able to give you a different perspective of Illinois.
Is that weird that I just rolled through that like in a span of, I don't know how long?
You just sped through it like a good old ticket-getting person.
Full disclosure, recently, back in July, I actually did get a ticket.
I'm sorry.
It's my fault. I thought I could make the light. It was yellow. And then when I went through, it was solid red. And there happened to be one of our fine, upstanding sheriffs from our area remind me that I'm old enough to know better and slow down. He wrote me a ticket. So I'm embarrassed to admit I think it's because he saw the North Carolina Ram that I have in the back. It's a pillow pet in the back of my car and the North Carolina logo. That's what made me think of that and that weaving story from Champaign. So I know you're not in Champaign, kind of close enough.
I am just a little ways away, about an hour and some away, but I'm so sorry for your pain. But welcome to the club, by the way, because I too have had a similar experience. Yes. Hard reds are very different than first yellows.
Yes. He said, it's 4 seconds. So I'm like, 4 seconds? I didn't have time to stop. And he said, you're old enough to know better. I don't know if I should be more offended by that statement, my driving ability put into question.
Yeah, probably both. It's
probably
all good.
Both. So help us with this as we dive in, because I'm sure people don't want to hear about that any longer. In our new house, my wife and I are celebrating our first Christmas BTW in our brand new, freshly built house. We're going to have a tree this year. We're going to have lights. I might even have a cookie. If we found you as you were Christmas caroling through our neighborhood and we asked you to come in out of the cold in Oregon, because it's a little rainy sometimes, what pair of shoes might we find by the front door?
At Christmas, it would most definitely be my slippers. I am most at home in a pair of slippers. They are red, they've got fur inside, and they make my feet happy. So I'd be in those. If I were headed out to the cold, I'd probably be wearing a pair of boots with fluffy stuff coming out of the top of those too. I like to be comfortable, Neil. I want to be warm.
It sounds like it. No, listen, no judgment. I just discovered the shoes Hey Dudes. Now I'm on my second pair, sadly, because I've indulged maybe in now another pair. So I
Yes,
need help.
I have teen boys who have also discovered the flavor of Hey Dudes. Yes, they don't fit my feet. They really seem to like them.
And then Crocs. I also have Crocs apparently too. So
Yes, we
that's
have those too.
it's
And why do
dangerous.
kids wear white socks with Crocs? That's a question for you to ponder as we continue in our episode. If you have a solution for the white socks besides just buying black ones, let me know.
I don't think I own any white socks to come to think of because my wife always gives me a bad time because I have some Jordans that are white and
Yeah.
she tells me to wear white
Yeah.
socks with them, but I still wear the black socks with them. So it looks like a penguin or an Oreo cookie. Help us with this as we dig into you. When you hear homecoming, what comes to mind for you?
The word belonging feels like homecoming to me. It's that place where no matter what you bring through the door, you are welcome. There's a difference I've discovered between a house and a home. So you just built a house. Congratulations, by the way. That's wonderful. You'll get to celebrate beautifully this year. Four walls don't make a home. They make a building, they make a structure for people to live in. Home is what happens when you can drop all of your things as you enter the door and know that you're in a safe place, that you are welcome there, that what you bring to the table is just as important as what anybody else brings. In a house, you might have a few conversations scattered here or there. Your presence can come and go and it doesn't really matter. But in a home, your presence matters. And so when I think about homecoming, it's that process of demonstrating belonging and welcomes. Babies have a homecoming when they're first born into their family, or after the first day of kindergarten, a kid comes home and there's all the feels, or maybe a college student comes back home for the first time and there's the favorite meals and all the smells that come with the apple crisp or whatever else it is that you loved having before you went off to college. So to me, that's this image of homecoming where you belong there and are fully welcome.
So it sounds like Jennifer didn't maybe have the greatest homecoming of her own, if I'm reading between the line.
You are, Neil. That is true. I was very gifted by God a little bit later in life. In my teen years, I moved from my mother and stepfather's house to my grandparents' home as they took guardianship of me. And that's where I learned the distinction. I grew up in a fairly conflicted, difficult house, not quite home. I do believe that my mom did the very best that she could do as an alcoholic. There were a lot of places where home life didn't exist for me. And so I spent a lot of time at friends' homes or other adventures and other places. Coming into my address, I was often alone. It was not a place of welcome for me. And I don't at all mean to say that my mother and stepfather didn't love us or didn't care about us. They simply had other priorities that often took over rather than developing this sense of home that I discovered when I moved to live with my grandparents.
So growing up, knowing that there was maybe some trauma and some hardship and some challenges, how did that shape you then when you and your husband get together and you start building your life and your new home with him?
The blessing of not having grown up with a very intact, stable home in my earlier years is that God planted a seed for what I wanted to have when I would eventually get married and have children. And thankfully, I was able to watch that modeled beautifully by my grandparents. They were retired by all rights and purposes. They should have been off doing whatever grandparents do on their own and not having to raise a teenage girl into adulthood. I saw modeled in them a kind of deference and love for one another that was sacrificial, forgiveness that was genuine and real, things that I didn't experience or observe when I grew up as a younger girl. Fast forward, my husband and I got married much later in life. We were in our mid 30s when we got married and late 30s by the time we had children. I wanted for our family what I did not grow up with. Part of that, I did a lot of reading. I did a lot of observing and watching, but I also had some pretty incredible families along the way as I grew up, from our church, from some of my closest friends. And I remember then thinking, I want to be able to create that in my home someday. Maybe a longer process for us than for others because we got married later. That was a lot of years of planting and nurturing seeds of what a home would look like. And I think our kids would tell you they have a crazy home. We're like any other normal family. We have our share of all kinds of things. I know that my kids know that they are welcome here. that they belong here, and their friends are welcome here and they belong here. We have an enormous yard in our neighborhood. And one of the reasons that we bought this home was because of the size of the yard, because we saw and made room for kids to be able to play in our yard. And that's the reality of our yard. If you go look out under the magnolia tree, you'll see all the grass is rubbed out because that's where home plate for wiffle ball stands. And there's almost never grass there. That's why we built it. That's why we did it.
Why do you think so many people struggle with recreating a new home after they've had such a traumatic upbringing, or maybe there's, again, some hardship along the way? Nobody had the perfect home. Nobody lived on Walton Mountain. Nobody had the Brady Bunch. Nobody had the Cosby type home. It seemed like TV for me wrecked it and ruined me in malformation. And so I feel like TV had malformation of me in my home. I'm admitting it. It's shamefully, but not really. I watched 90210 most of my adult life.
Like the rest of us.
And so I thought everybody was going to be Jim and Cindy Walsh, and everyone was going to love Brenda and Brandon, and it was all going to be fun and great. It's not like that. It's fake.
And then it's not. Mm-hmm. No,
it felt more like Kelly's house, which was turmoil and tragedy.
Yeah, no, it's not real. And I think we have a dream that God plants there and he nurtures it along the way. But the reality is, as much as I want the home of my dreams, I am still wrestling with the home of my past. We don't get to just cut off our past as if it doesn't impact who we have become or how we home or family with others. The truth is, we are impacted by where we come from. My kids would also tell you, being quite honest, that we have struggled with a lot of things. In my early years raising children, I would have described myself as a fairly angry mother. I wanted nothing more than to be different than the way my mother was when we were growing up. I didn't want to be angry. I didn't want to be absent. The reality is that's what I learned. That's what I knew. Those early years, amid all the pressures and all the demands of young and little kids, it was very easy to slip right into those old habits that I had grown up with because they were ingrained. However, God, in his goodness, in his grace, in his mercy, he would keep speaking to me as this mom saying, I want something different for you. I want something more for your family. This stops with you. I want you to create something different for them, and you have to let me do it. I remember one of our sons, I think it was our younger son, it was Awana night, VBS. Only during the year, they would meet every Thursday night. He came home. He was exhausted, maybe 5 years old. He was tired. I knew he'd be tired. He came in flinging his shoes off, throwing things everywhere. He was angry. He was hungry. He was tired. He was all the things. But, HALT, right? Hungry, angry, lonely, tired. When one of those four is in action, just back up, take a deep breath, and start again. I could tell he was unraveling. And in my earlier days, I would have just yelled at him, brought him upstairs, forcefully brushed his teeth, and dropped him off in bed. Probably said a prayer, because of course that's what good moms do. And then said goodnight, took a deep breath, and regretted every minute of it. But this night, I chose differently. I asked him if he needed a hug. I sat down on the floor where he was falling apart. He kind of sat on the other part of the entryway, and I just waited for him. And I said, when you're ready, bud, I'm right here for you. I know you're tired. And it took a little bit, but eventually he ended up sitting in my lap. And then I put my arms around him. And as soon as I did that, I thought, oh, good, we've made it. And then he started squirming and he started yelling again and he started throwing more things and he started getting angry. And I said, you know what, bud, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to wait with you for as long as it takes. Every night hasn't been like that. For me, that is that image of God creating a different path, a new path than the path that I grew up with. The truth is, I didn't have that when I came home hungry, angry, lonely, tired. I was left to figure it out on my own. Slowly, God has taught me over the years what it looks like to be a more present parent that demonstrates welcoming and belonging that I want to be sure my kids experience.
All I can think of right now is the Awana Cubby song. I don't even know how it goes. Something about hopping and jumping and I want to be an Awana Cubby. Dun, 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 dun. Anyway, my daughter was
If one of them comes in, I'll have to have them sing it for us because now I got to know it. But
there's an Awana Cubby song. And so being 5, he was probably an Awana Cubby. So anyway, Awana Cubbies or Awanas, just for the non-church people, it's like Cub Scouts for church people. So you get badges, you get jewels. I only went for the games. and the girls. So, and yeah, I was in 5th grade and still liked the girls. So stop it.
That's awesome.
Blue team rules forever. So on that same thread, as you're describing that interaction with your youngest and how you sat and waited patiently, I wonder about that in a church setting. Because let me tell you.
Great question.
I have been to churches, and I've been to some churches that I will probably never step foot in again. My story, a little bit of it, I made some choices and I left a church that I grew up in. It was in anger. And it was in frustration, and I basically, took everything that I had worked for, tore it in half, and left it just at the steps of the church and walked away. And it wasn't because of anything they did. It was all on me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me, Taylor Swift. It was truly me. I'm the problem. They weren't. They made their choice. Now, granted, do they make the right choice? That doesn't matter at the end of the day. It matters what my choices were. That's what I wanted to talk about. It took actually reading a book called You Lost Me, put out by the Barna Group, and it took another guy named Garrett Largy, who used to be our executive producer and who makes Christmas episodes. Foreshadowing, Garrett will be on at the end of the month to do our Christmas episode. Why aren't our churches like that? Why aren't we extending the hug or waiting, or why aren't we like that?
What occurs to me, first of all, the reason we're not like that is because we're in too much of a hurry and we have too much at stake. We're not willing to lose what we actually don't already have anyway. We don't want to lose what we think we have, but don't. Think what Jesus said to Peter when Peter said, how many times do I have to forgive somebody? And a mathematician might look at that story and say, 70 times 7, 490 times. Jesus wasn't talking about a mathematical equation. He was saying, you need to forgive until you stop keeping track. And if that takes 490 times, then you go 491. I don't know about you, Neil, but when I start keeping track, I can't keep track of 491 times of forgiving somebody. I just don't have that in me. I lose track. And that's the point. And I think what we struggle to do in the church is we don't take the time, number one. We forget that it took a lot of years for such and so a person to get where they are with whatever sin you want to put in the blank. And that just as I have been forgiven for all those years that I developed that sin pattern, God has also forgiven them. And I think a lot of times in the church, we have this perspective that, well, I want God to forgive me, but no, he does not need to forgive them. And so I think we lose sight truly of how much God has forgiven us. And so it's easy then to point the finger or hold a grudge or hold on to someone else's sin. We lose sight of how much we've been forgiven of. Well, I said the slow down piece. We live at such a fast pace in our lives that it requires sometimes 12 years of marinating, sifting through, digging up what was actually there to be able to get to what we call in the church grace. We think grace is just turning the other cheek or pretending that something didn't happen. That's not grace at all. Jesus taught us that grace is about acknowledging that there has been brokenness, that something is not the way it should be. There's been a separation. And sometimes it takes 12 years to acknowledge that there's been a separation. Then the other part of grace is that moving toward part. So we acknowledge the separation. We have to be willing to take that next step forward, which requires we recognize how much we've been forgiven. When we are in touch with that, then we have the capacity to extend forgiveness to the person in front of us. And in the church, I just think oftentimes we're in too much of a hurry to do that. We don't see our sin and we're too quick.
I was at a men's thing and the speaker was such a jerk.
Oh, no.
I'm being a little bit facetious. He said this statement.
Did he step on your toes?
Oh, absolutely. Not only did he step, he made me mashed potatoes, and I don't even really like mashed potatoes. He made this statement, which I just think is so profound. It has haunted me to this day. Every time I talk, interact with somebody, it just haunts me. Here's the statement. Where's the gospel in that? And I'm like, well, hold on a second. He said, because the gospel is all about grace. When you boil it all down, yes, it's about the sacrifice and the death, burial, and resurrection. And I don't want to get too theology driven per se. At the end of the day, it is a grace-filled message. And he said, so Neil, what do you do when you're at work? Because I work in customer service, so I'm dealing with people all day long from all walks of life, whether they're angry, happy, in between, all the things. And let me just tell you, people are awful. They're just mean.
I'm sure you get it.
All right. Especially in an automotive industry where we're fixing people's cars, people are just, they get irate. And I'm like, cool. Now I know where your idol is at least. The thing that he challenged me on, and his name's Bill Krause, Bill says, hey, where's the gospel in that person, Neil? And I'm like, in other words, where's the grace that you can give them in that moment? And I'm like, I don't want to. And he's like, but grace has been given to you, so why can't you give grace back to them? And what they did is wrong.
Sure.
You're not omitting that. You're just saying there's grace in that. There's grace for that person. And after Bill's talk, he said, where's the gospel in that, Neil? Where's the gospel in that? And I came back to work after that retreat and I said, you know what? From now on, anytime ruffles my feathers or maybe doesn't meet my expectation, I'm going to remind myself, give grace. And the first time it happened, I mean, it wasn't 5 minutes, I was back to work. And it happened, of course, right? Let's see how this really worked. And I was like, I need to give grace. And so I went to my boss and I told him, I was like, listen, I think I know the problem. And he's like, okay, what? And I said, I need to give grace. And he said, what? And I was like, I know you probably don't get that. I'm declaring it just so you can ask me, am I giving grace? That's all I need, just accountability. And he goes, okay. And so something happened again. And I was kind of fired up. And he goes, did you give grace? And I was like, Balaam and the donkey now comes to mind.
Exactly. Yes. That's awesome.
Not that he's a donkey, not saying that in case he ever hears this. My point is, I wonder about that for us and for you. Yeah. Was grace prevalent in the home? Was grace part of your story? Are you able to give grace to mom and stepdad?
It very much is. As you were talking and as you shared that first story, I went back to 18 years old. I am at a youth group event. I'm a youth group leader in training. So I'm there with youth from our church. We're gathered around the fire pit. It's maybe Saturday evening or whatever. And someone had given a talk and it was all about letting go of whatever is keeping us from receiving God's love.
I've done those messages a time or two. That's why I'm at that youth camp because I'm the speaker when he's doing that. Yeah, that's me.
Okay, well, you can hear the fire crackling and you can smell the water's edges. I'm there too, and I immediately start thinking about my mother. And I'm having this internal conversation with God. First, it started something like this. I'm one of the youth group leaders in training, so I'm in charge of these kids. This is for them. This is not for me. This is real. You know how God is. He's persistent. He continues. And I keep hearing the voice, literally the voice of my mother and replaying interactions between the two of us. And God said to my soul as clear as day, you cannot receive my love for you while you're holding bitterness towards your mother at the same time. So you have to decide. You can hold on to one and let go of the other. But if I forgive her, if I let it go, she's going to tell me, forgive you for what? If you hold on to your bitterness, you cannot receive my love. She might say that to you, but that's her story. And you're not in charge of her story. Jennifer, you're in charge of your story. So I took the proverbial log. Actually, it was a real log. I put it on the fire and I can still hear it crackling as I could see the word bitterness burn up in the fire. Camp finished. A week later, I called my mom. I said, hey, Mom, could we go meet at Friendly's? I don't think they even have those anymore, but it was an ice cream place. Could we go meet at Friendly's? There's something really important I want to talk to you about. So we meet a week later or whatever. And I told her about my experience at camp. And I told her that I forgave her. Can you guess what she said?
For what?
Exactly. And I was like, are you kidding me, God? See, I told you this is what. It was such a mercy and kindness of God. He prepared me in that moment, just like he prepared you with your coworker, with what you are already going to do. And I just let it go. And I said, I simply need to say this, Mom. It might not make very much sense to you, but I forgive you for not being there when I needed you. Talk about awkward moment. Eventually, we worked through it. Here's the impact of the story. 6 years later, She is in Boston, where I was living at the time with some roommates. It was my birthday. We were celebrating birthdays. Where has God been at work in her life this year? My mother knows only one person in the room. She's a very quiet, typically shy type person. She was with me for the weekend because it was my birthday. People started talking about where they'd seen God at work in my life. There was a quiet moment. And my mom, she looked up and she said to these mostly strangers, I love that my daughter loved me when I was unlovable, and she forgave me when I was unforgivable. Now, I'd like to tell you that fast forward, I'm in my 50s, so fast forward 30 plus more years later, everything is rosy and cheery, and that's not the truth. That's not part of our story. There is a lot to unpack in the next 30 years. But here's the point. Could have made her apologize to me in those 6 years, or I could wait for God to do the work he was already doing and let it be his work and not something that I was trying to force. And I would have missed out on all those 6 years of life with her, getting to know her and learning how to be with her in an unbittered way. And that's the gift that God gave until she was ready to move on in her story. And I think that's the waiting space of grace. That's that sacred space that sometimes takes 6 years or 12 years or maybe even a lifetime. And we don't fully get there. But until we can recognize that we are only in charge of our own story and what we do with it, then we live a shackled kind of life, waiting for people to be somebody they're not ready to be quite yet.
I'm trying to hold back my emotions as yours are coming out. I went to North Carolina back in November 2023. It was the first time I'd ever gone since I was born in North Carolina. And I spent 4 days in Chapel Hill. So I could have seen Amber Cullum, our good friend Amber. I could have.
Oh, I would have been so jealous.
I could have. Amber's busy with a lot of stuff.
She's a fellow Grace gal too.
Yeah. And that's why it has me on this maybe Grace ideas. I'm thinking of Amber in this moment because I know you know her. You know, she has a great show called Grace Enough. And right now I think in this world, we don't have enough grace for people.
We need more. Yeah.
We need more. And so her show's obviously very applicable. It was homecoming weekend for the University of North Carolina. They were playing their arch rival, Duke, which is the whole reason why we went out there. I bought this sign for my studio at home. I love the sign. Every time I look at it, I think of this story. I went into FedEx to ship it back home. Couldn't take it on the plane with me, and it wouldn't fit in my bag. It was too big. So I went into this FedEx on Sunday before we went to the North Carolina basketball game. So not only did we watch football, we watched basketball. So it's like a dream weekend for me. Like God just was like, you know what, Neil, I'm going to set this up perfect for you. You're going to watch football Saturday night. You're going to watch basketball on Sunday. It's just going to be amazing. So I went to this place, FedEx in Chapel Hill, and this guy was a complete jerk to me. I would use other words, but you're a lady, so I'll refrain from using said words, but you can male anatomy, we'll just say. He was a male anatomy. I got done and I was so spun around, just angry as all get out. And I jump in the Tesla. Yes, we had a Tesla. My brother-in-law is obsessed with Tesla. So I get in the Tesla and Rory, my brother-in-law, atheist, pronounced atheist, says maybe he's even agnostic, has no, again, affiliation with God, doesn't want anything to do with him, says to me, so hey, let me get this straight. You're going to let that guy wreck and ruin your day. This is your dream day. Like all you've been talking about since we landed was seeing this, what is it again? This Dean Dome, this place with all the jerseys. Like this is heaven for you. You're going to let somebody wreck your heaven. And I literally stopped in that moment. And I was like, no, I am absolutely not. And I said, you know what? Maybe he's having a bad day. Maybe I caught him. Maybe I caught him on a bad moment. And then Rory's like, what else? And so, of course, my imagination starts running amok. And I'm like, well, he's probably divorced and his wife probably left him for a UNC student. And so, his punishment is to work in chapel. Like, I took it way too far, Jennifer. I took it way too far. I had a whole story. He had a backstory. I had all this stuff. In your story with your son, the one that I think led us on this thread, which, again, great story, is I wonder how many people out there right now would love with everything they have, with Elon Musk type money, would give anything to have a hug from mom.
Yep.
What about you? Are you in that camp? Are you with them? What would that mean to you?
I have been blessed over the years to receive some pretty sincere hugs from my mom. Yeah, I would say yes. And I would say I've received them. But I think here's the difference. And this is where grace comes in. This is the acknowledgement piece. It's recognizing people for who they are and not who you want them to be. And so I have received from my mom the very best that she has to offer. Now, wouldn't it be nice if things were different? I come in and the Christmas tree is all lit up and there's all the full joy and the 53 years of all these incredible memories of all these Christmases together. Okay, that's not my story. The beauty from ashes part of my story is that when my mother is in my living room celebrating Christmas with us, our hugs are as genuine and sincere as they can possibly be. I'm not stuck so much on what I'm not receiving from her. I'm learning to receive her for who she is, a broken person who is loving the very best she knows how. Now, every day isn't like that. I mean, the truth is there are a lot of days that I let the stuff that she's wrestling with, I let it ruin my epic experience. One phone call and everything I was looking forward to, all of that reality you were sitting in North Carolina. There are lots of days when I have just said goodbye to the beauty of the moment because I was stuck in my expectations of what I wish I had from her and don't. So there are those two. But I believe grace is about coming back to that space that recognizes this is the other side of eternity. We're not in eternity where there are no more tears and no more mourning and no more grief and no more dying. We don't live there yet. And so on this side of eternity, this is part of our reality. And I can either kick and scream and spend my life complaining, or I can learn to embrace the woman who is right in front of me, who God loves as much as he loves me.
You mentioned you learned that. It makes me think of the Apostle Paul when he says, I've learned to be content in all things. By the way, I don't read the rest of that. I go back to and I get stuck on, wait a minute, hold on. Question in the back here. Yes, Mr. Paul, how did you learn that?
It sounds cliche, being in the Word. Jesus, one of my, probably two of my favorite stories, and they're very different, the prodigal son and the woman at the well. What I love about the story of the prodigal son is there are actually, in my mind, three prodigals in that story. There's the obvious younger son who's a prodigal. There's the older son who's a prodigal. He can't let go of his entitlement and bitterness against his brother. There's a way in which the father's a bit of a prodigal too, because he doesn't act the way we expect him to act. Fathers of that stature, they don't go running. Fathers don't take their best robe and put it on the son who already stepped on the robe that he already had. Fathers don't give a ring as a sign of belonging to someone who already threw away everything that was his to have at any moment. And yet the father comes running the moment the son turns to home. I'm going to go back to the house and home image. So the prodigal, he comes home with his rehearsed speech. He's coming home to a house, to a building with four walls because he's hungry and he needs something. What he finds along the way is a father who's been creating home for him the entire time. You belong here. You are welcome here. And so you ask me, how did I get to this place? I'm not in a perfect place by any means. Let me tell you, I struggle an awful lot with the dynamic between my mom and I, especially right now as her health is failing a little bit more significantly. That's how I get there. The father came running the moment this daughter started and turned for home at a campfire when I was 18 years old. And that's the father that continues to love me. The other story that I love is the story of the woman at the well. She is a woman who has all the questions and all the answers. She is a master at changing the subject, essentially making herself look as good as she possibly can. Yeah, she's got 5 husbands. But by the way, you Jews say the place we need to worship, we say, and Jesus cuts through all of that. And he looks at her and has the longest conversation recorded in the Gospels. In that conversation, Jesus connects eye to eye with this woman and fills the thirst she's had her entire life. He says, you are welcome here. You belong here. And then she turns around and she walks back to the people who have hurt her, offended her, turned her away, and done nothing but make life difficult for her, and says, hey, I think I met the Messiah. Come see. He knew everything I've already done. So did they, but they didn't know the conversation she had just had. Those two images for me are what move us from you don't deserve my love or my forgiveness to how could I not extend them to you? They've been so generously extended to me.
Jennifer, before we let you go, that folks know how they can connect with you, whether that be on your socials. I know you have a show. Tell us all those wonderful things and how those folks can get connected with you if they desire to, because that's always fun to meet with people outside of the show.
I would absolutely love that. I'm guessing you could probably guess what my show's all about based on what I've shared about my story. You can find me at Living the Grace Life podcast on any of your podcasting platforms. You can also find me at jennifersakata.com on my website. I'm on Instagram, probably far too much, and Facebook. So you can find me in all of those places. If you go to the show, Living the Grace Life, the website, jennifersakata.com, I would love to meet up with any of your listeners.
No relation to John Sakata?
No, I get asked that a lot because there's a different spelling. This is the Japanese spelling, Sakata, as opposed to the Italian spelling, which is Cicada. I think. I don't know. You'll have to look that up. But no, we're not related.
Okay. I can't even think of a John Sakata song. I know he's a singer. Can't think of one off the top of my head right now. But Jennifer, I just want to say, before we get to our excitement at the end, I really love your heart. I love what you shared. I love that Eric and I got to talk and converse because I ask him from time to time. Eric Nevins from Halfway There podcast, great mentor of mine. You were the first name when I asked for a recommendation for someone. Now, why you ask me that and I would ask the same back to Eric? I think I know why now. You're a fantastic young lady, and I just want to affirm what you said, and I really hope people heard what you said, and if they didn't, they should rewind and really listen.
That's an old word.
I know.
Flip the tape over.
Yeah. Flip the tape.
That's our generation.
Yeah. Flip the tape over and rewind it again. Speaking of tapes, I got to show you this, and it won't translate to the audio. But that is a mixtape that's faded. Yeah. So every time I like cassette tapes because it makes me think of the old days of making mixtapes on my little cassette player.
Goodness.
Again, thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate what you shared, and I just really value you. So now on to the most exciting thing ever. I'm going to turn it over to our main man, Zach.
Has me a little scared.
Zach is going to take it from here. Zach, here we go. Tell us what's going on.
It's now that time in the show to play the fastest growing game in the podcast world. We call it Heel Hustle. Today our guest will try to answer all 6 of these questions in 60 seconds or less to win an Amazon gift card. Amazon not responsible for this commercial spot, nor did they pay to let us use their name. Audience, feel free to play at home. Are you ready? Let's put 60 seconds on that clock. Ready, set, hustle!
The game begins in 3, 2, 1.
All right, Jennifer, here you go. You got 60 seconds. Let's see if we can answer all 6 of these. All right.
Okay.
Who is one person you would trade places with for a week?
Oh, for a week? Oh,
Yeah, remember, 60 seconds.
Oh my gosh, I don't have much time. Okay, Neil Matthews. I've not been to Oregon. I'd love to go see it.
Fair enough. Guilty pleasure.
Oh, dark chocolate.
What is the best compliment you've ever received?
Your hair looks fabulous. Is that real? People pay a lot of money for that. And yes, it is real.
What is the worst piece of advice you've ever received?
Just get over it.
What is something you wish you were better at?
Oh, gosh, a lot of things. The butterfly. I loved it in swimming, but I wasn't very good at it.
What is something that never fails to make you laugh?
Oh, dogs, funny animals, and kids telling jokes.
Ooh, just at the buzzer.
Did I make it?
You did.
Oh,
just
my
at the
goodness.
buzzer. Yeah. That was stressful, wasn't it?
It was.
The first time we did this, our very first gal, Barbara, she was in one of our I think our second or third episode of this season, she's like, Neil, it's the music. It's so intense. I was like, well, that was the idea.
Right. It sounded exactly like a game show. And I even misspoke because I have been to Oregon. One of my dearest friends from seminary lives in Oregon, and we had a lovely time there. So Dawn, I'm sorry, I forgot about our Oregon visit. I wouldn't mind trading with you too, Neil, just for a little bit.
That's fun. You would get your own studio. Do you have your own studio or spot when you podcast?
If I could show you, no, this is my living room. And I have 1, 2, 3 cardboard boxes in front of me on which my computer is standing. And my microphone is on 2 other boxes. So no studio here, just a living room.
Well, see, if you traded places with me, you could record at the Shoe Shack studio, which is our 10 by 10 studio away from my house. Yeah, you'll have to check the socials. We've had some social posting on the Shoe Shack. So again, Jennifer, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate you and all that you shared. You're just amazing. So just know that.
Thanks, Neil. It's been an absolute privilege to be with you. Thanks for having me.
All right, guys and gals, kids and campers alike, that is it. That is all. That is our show today. She didn't make me cry. I just, here's the thing is I like jabbed myself when I was like muting myself in the eye. That's why there's water coming out of my eye right now, right? That seems plausible. Can you imagine though, coming into your house? Like just close your eyes. If you're driving, don't necessarily do this, but if you're not, just go with me for a second. Coming into your house, you open the door, you're in there, it's right in the entryway, you kick your shoes off. Who is that one person you want to hug from? Who is it? Now, listen, some of you are going to get kooky on me and say, well, it's Mr. Rogers. That'd be fun. Okay, fine. Don't get kooky on me. Who's the one person? And let me ask you, if you have that one person in mind and you have an opportunity, can you go hug them this week? And really hug them. Maybe not break their back, hug them, like hug them. That's still one of the sexiest things about my wife. She gives the best hugs. And I love it every time. Don't be like me. Don't regret and don't wish. Go make it happen. Let me know if you do that. You can let me know at opspodcast.com. It's a great place to let me know. You can let us know on our socials at OPS Podcast Show on our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or X, depending on what you want to say. Don't ever forget this. Remember, when you walk in other people's shoes, you really do get a different perspective on life. Thank you so much for listening. Stay tuned till next week when we walk in other people's shoes.